Hey, Guy Powell here, and welcome to the next episode of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. If you haven't already done so, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more of these episodes and podcasts. As you may know, I am the author of the book The Only Witness, a Christian historical fiction on a possible history tracing the Shroud and how it moved from where it was originally created in Jerusalem in the tomb, all the way over to where it is now, which is in Turin, Italy. Today, we're speaking with Massimo Paris, and I've known him for quite a while now, but we met in person recently at the St. Louis Shroud Conference, and it was wonderful. And his talk that we're going to repeat here was just absolutely incredible. Some very, very interesting things that he's going to talk about. Let me just give you a short background on Massimo. So he was born in Rome, Italy, and now he resides in Broomall, Pennsylvania, and he's dedicated over 3 decades to studying and researching the Shroud of Turin. And he's personally had the honor and blessing to venerate the shroud back in 2000 during its exhibition in Turin. And then, of course, he is a lecturer, a longtime lecturer on the shroud and other related miracles. His background is in medicine, and he's also studied archaeology, art history, and languages. And his passion extends to theology, philosophy, and metaphysics. So, Massimo, welcome. So good to have you.
Thank you, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here with you and to talk to the audience of your podcast. So thank you for having invited me.
Absolutely. No, it was so good to hear you speak, and I was just amazed by some of the research that you presented out in St. Louis. So let's get started with, what is your backstory on the Shroud of Turin? How did you get involved in it?
Well, it's not that I never heard of the Shroud until 1990, but I knew about it. But 1990, I was one afternoon I was walking in the center of Rome, and I was passing by a small church. I had a small church on the right hand side. There were some steps, and even without turning my head, with the corner of my eye, I had the impression of seeing I don't recall if it was just the picture of the negative of the face of Christ or the whole negative, but something related with the shroud. And so I turned around and I climbed a few steps. I read they were going to have a lecture that evening, so I attended that lecture. And actually, they were having a series of lectures every semester. So some during the fall, some during the spring semester, and then they repeated that every year. So I started attending regularly, and then after 1 or 2 years, there was a flyer that was where it was mentioned that Dr. Carlo Goldoni, who was a Roman hematologist, the one who identified the blood type on the Sudarum of Oviedo, was giving a free course at his house. So I attended a free course at his house. And then later I learned about Emanuele Marinelli, but until I remained in Italy, my relationship with the Shroud was an acquisition of information. I didn't do any lectures or things like that. But then when after marrying Carol and moving to the States in 2001, I started giving lectures, and then I attended my first international conference that was the first St. Louis in 2014. They attended Pasco 2017, and they attended now the last one, St. Louis, the one that just we had, that where I also presented two papers, one of which was this one that I'm going to talk about today.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm excited to see your presentation again. I was awed by what you had spoken about. And so I'm going to let you have at it. You're going to give the presentation, and I'll pop in every once in a while with some questions, and I'm just going to soak it all in. So let you go ahead.
Okay. So as you can see here in the first slide, The title is The Calvary, the Tomb of Christ, and the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre, 2,000 years of history, archaeology, art, and witnesses' accounts. So the picture behind the title, that is the main entrance, or which is actually the south facade of the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre. So if we had the drone with the camera, we started flying the drone from the floor of that small square that there is in front of the basilica. We would see past above the facade there are those there are two domes. A larger dome that is west and a smaller dome that is east. And actually, those two domes are a very clear landmark in the panorama of Jerusalem, to the point that sorry, okay. Actually, under the larger dome, there is this small building that is called the Edicule. The Edicule shelters, since the time of Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, that there was the one who built that whole complex. But although the present Edicule dates back to 1810, so it was rebuilt in 1810. But within that, apparently quite, yeah, you see, modern, dating to 1810, it shelters what it allegedly is the tomb of Christ. I prepared very thoroughly for the conference, and at this point, I have no doubts whatsoever that you really sheltered the real tomb where Christ had been laid to rest. But so the Edicule is under the larger dome, is exactly at the center of the floor of the structure that is around under the big dome. But then further east, still within the basilica, there are still the remains of this. You see this rock, the rock of Calvary. So the rock on which Christ had been crucified. I know that sometimes I heard the Calvary to be called a hill. Sometimes actually I heard it to be called a Mount Calvary. Actually, probably the whole height could be no more than 45, 50 feet total. And it's placed on different levels. So there is a ground level, a first level, and then there is some parts are actually kind of underground. So I was saying that the two domes are a very peculiar landmark in the panorama of Jerusalem. So if you look, for example, from this aerial view, you see those two domes are kind of almost at the center of the old city of Jerusalem. So at this point, I would like. I didn't mention in St. Louis, but since a priest friend of mine had. But actually, what is the connection with the Calvary and the tomb with the shroud? Well, I said, well, actually, those are using a Latin expression, two conditio sine qua non, two conditions without which you would not have had the shroud. Had Christ not been crucified, and even before the crucifixion, in case he had not been flogged, crowned with thorns, and had not been crucified, we would not have had all the wounds that we see on the shroud to begin with. And then if Christ had not been crucified, of course, he would not have died, and thus he would not have been placed in the tomb. And so had he not died, he would not have been wrapped in a shroud. He would not have been placed in the tomb, and he would not have then resurrected. And so he would the blood stains would not have transferred to the cloth. And then at the moment of resurrection, that radiation of energy would not have imprinted the body images. So I think that's to summarize a little bit why I'm talking about the tomb, the Calvary and the tomb. There is also another aspect that when I was in Italy before moving to the States, I was a tour guide, so I have always been interested in archaeology, history of art, and this is a field that was I would somehow my field of expertise and something that fascinates me. So it's attracted me enormously, and much more than trying to figure out how the body image was imprinted on the cloth.
Yeah,
Um,
same for me, Massimo. I think the archaeology and the history and the art history, which are all of your background, make so much sense. So thank you. Just
so back to the my activity as a tour guide. Um, I had seen a lot of representations of um, the burial and the resurrection of Christ, and here we have on the left-hand side one that is very familiar to people that are interested in the shroud because it's from the Prey Codex. But and often in these representations, artistic representation, there is Christ that is buried or is resurrecting from a sarcophagus. So I told myself many times, but without giving too much attention to it, but I said, well, I seriously doubt that Christ was placed to rest or was buried in a sarcophagus. But anyway, here we have on the left-hand side there is the Prey Codex. On the right-hand side, that is a miniature page, a miniature an illuminated page from the a psalter that was given to Ingeborg of Denmark when she married Philip II of France, but it dates more or less to the same period of the Prey Codex, maybe 5-10 years later, but more or less the same time. So now we get into the Renaissance artists. And so this is Piero della Francesca. We see, of course, not of course, but we see Christ resurrecting from a sarcophagus. This is Mantegna, another Renaissance painter, Christ resurrecting from a sarcophagus. This is Raphael, the famous Raphael, Christ resurrecting from a sarcophagus. And this is Lucas Cranach, also Christ resurrecting from a sarcophagus. These are all the painters that the works of art that I showed, the few that I showed so far, they were all made in the 15th or 16th century, so during the period of the Renaissance. But then if you look at so the works I showed were paintings, but if you look also at sculpture, the situation didn't change too much in the sense that, for example, here you have this is from a Gothic sculpture from the Cathedral of Worms, but we have also again Christ resurrecting from a sarcophagus. And this is a ceramic sculpture by the famous brothers della Robbia. This was made in particular by Andrea della Robbia, also in the 16th century, and in this case also Christ resurrecting from a sarcophagus. But then if we look at other representations of the tomb of Christ, where they don't show, when there is not a sarcophagus that is represented, and we see the entrance to the tomb, often the entrance seems a quite normal door. doesn't seem, it's of course it's not something enormous, is also it's neither enormous nor too small, so it seems quite normal. This is a miniature from the Ottonian Bamberg Apocalypse that dates to the 11th century. And if we move to movies, this is a modern movie that was made in 2012. I think that I didn't watch that movie, but I find an example that very likely I think that is Mary Magdalene. And also in this case, we see the entrance to the tomb was quite a normal entrance. There was another aspect that had kind of scratched my head for several years. When in chapter 20 of the Gospel of John, Peter and John run to the tomb. John arrives first, but doesn't enter. And you see there, and he's stooping down and looking, saw the linen cloth lying there. So since also in this drawing that was about Peter and John at the tomb, also in this case, the door seems a normal door. So I had wondered why the heck had John to stoop down if the door was normal.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, that is a great question. It's so interesting how you can take one word and people, just maybe naturally kind of ignore it. But when you take that one word and you realize that he had to stoop down, then that has clear implications as to, in this case, what the tomb looks like.
well, I must say, and Carol has mentioned to me a lot, so since once I moved in Italy, I work as a tour guide. Once I moved to the States, I started working as an interpreter. So I've always paid an enormous amount of attention to the precision, the accuracy of the words that I used. Sometimes people use words very loosely, let's put it this way. So for me, to stoop down means you have to bend at least. So, but then if we look also at images of tombs, real tombs. This is a tomb in Jerusalem. It is called the Herod tomb, but apparently, very likely was not. But here too, you see here at the bottom, there are some wooden steps that go down. So that gives the impression that the door is not that tall, but actually it's a normal door. Those steps give the impression of being shorter, but actually it's not. So, um, what changed my mind, or at least what was for me the trigger of paradigm shift when I purchased this book that was roll back the stone. That was written by Byron McCain, probably he's still alive. The book was written in 2003. It was published in 2003. He was the director of the excavations at the Acropolis of Sepphoris in Israel. So he was very familiar with the excavations and especially necropolis, so burial customs in the Jewish world. And once I went to read page 33, that is this one. So let me read it. Let me read it. Say, entry into this tomb began with an external forecourt, one wall which contained a small entryway, approximately half meter by half meter of height by half meter of width, and 0.8 meters of depth. But this is what the most important thing. The typical stone that covered the entrance to Jewish tomb in early Roman Palestine was thus nearly square or slightly rectangular in shape. It is actually quite rare for these stones to be round or to be situated in such a way as to be rolled away from the entrance to the tomb. In most cases, the stone would have had to be pulled or dragged, not rolled from the entrance. Or at least that means that had not to be rolled sideways, had to be probably pulled either back if you had to open the tomb or push forward to block the entrance to the tomb. So I started looking at that point. I said, well, let me find an example of how those tombs could be, and that is what I found. As you can see, the entrance, if not perfectly square, are definitely slightly rectangular, and there is that blocking stone or tombs that is definitely more, if not perfectly cubic, but definitely is more square or cubic than not circular or disc shape that we are accustomed to see everywhere in drawings, movies, and so on. So at that point, I decided to, as I said, that was for me that was the trigger of a paradigm shift that pushed me to start investigating more deeply. And so I found scholars that had different opinions. For example, the gentleman here on the left-hand side is Bart Ehrman, and the one on the right-hand side is John Dominic Crossan. These two scholars, for example, thought that since Christ had been executed as a criminal, very likely, best case scenario, had dropped his body, thrown his body into a common pitch. Worst case scenario, they had left his body on the cross to be devoured by wild animals, vultures, wild dogs, wild animals. No, of course, this is what they claim. This is what they claim. This is Dr. Mark Goodacre, who, as you can see, he published that paper, How Empty Was the Tomb? He posited that, according to his opinion, the tomb of Christ was a tomb in which also other people had been buried. So it was not an empty tomb, as often is a very common expression in that is used when regarding the Sunday Easter. But of course, just when regarding Bart Ehrman and John Dominic Crossan, I didn't believe at all that the Christ would have been thrown into a common pitch, let alone not be left on the cross to be devoured by. But even Goodacre, Christ was from Nazareth, so it was very unlikely, to say the least, that he could have a family tomb in Jerusalem. So already just for that fact, I didn't buy too much that his thesis. And then there was this Dr. Jody Magnus. She was a professor of archaeology at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. She had a position a little bit softer compared to the former three scholars, because she said, she wrote, although archaeology does not prove that there was a follower of Jesus named Joseph Arimathea, or that Pontius Pilate granted his request for Jesus' body, the gospel accounts describing Jesus' removal from the cross and burial accord well with archaeological evidence and with Jewish law. Okay? So at least I found someone that had a position that I would find a little bit more acceptable compared to the former three scholars. But then I, upon recommendation of a friend of mine, I was mentioned this gentleman. This gentleman was Father Virgilio Corbo. Father Virgilio Corbo was a Franciscan friar. I'm sure you know that the Basilica of the Sepulchre in Jerusalem is managed, staffed by three denominations: by the Catholics, represented by the Franciscans, by the Greek Orthodox, and by the Armenians. Although there are also some other denominations, but these three have the decisional power, the ones who can make the decisions, not the other ones. So in 1927, there had been a very strong earthquake in Jerusalem that had damaged the Basilica of Holy Sepulchre to the point that when the British ship, when they before leaving in 1947, they had placed scaffolds in front of the facade. Actually, they wanted to close the Basilica completely, but then the people that were the different denomination were able to make them a little bit more to come to a compromise. So they placed the scaffolds to support the facade, and then they placed iron girders around the edicule to harness it to prevent that it could collapse. But close to the 1960s, the situation had become quite difficult. It was absolutely necessary to carry out some archaeological excavations, especially with the task of to be a conservative excavation, to investigate, but also to strengthen the structures. So Father Corbo was, the works started in 1970, but Father Corbo was appointed the leader of the whole team of archaeologists in 1963. And for 17 years, I heard daily, but I would imagine probably on Sunday, he respected being a Franciscan, he respected the holiday of obligation. But the other days, so the 6th day, he would supervise the works of, you see here, Father Corbo talking with another member of the team. And then the works went on until 1980, and in 1981, Father Corbo published the results of the works of the team in a volume, in a 3-volume set. So the first, if you see my cursor, the first volume on the left is called Testo, that in Italian means text. The volume in another center were tables. Tables mean drawings made of archaeology to show the different excavation and so on. And the third volume, as you see a photo that it's like photos, pictures. So the photos unfortunately are in black and white, but I was able to purchase the three set. They see that is the one that I purchased. I'm not going to waste time, but just to be able to get those 3 volumes was an endeavor. So it was an adventure.
So was he in that previous picture? Was he actually in the edicule? Is that where he was then, and inside the tomb?
Well, inside the tomb, every day tourists that go there can get inside the tomb, but they actually remove, for example, the
Cover.
floor,
Yeah.
the marble slabs of the floor, and start excavating under that. So to enter into the tomb, it's not a difficulty. It's not a
Hmm.
problem. It's to start digging what was under the floor. So that was more
Yeah.
complicated. And so at this point, having learned the works of Father Corbo, I came to the conclusion that I said, well, you know what? I made a decision. I decide to follow first what the gospel said, and then I shall try to see if the archaeological evidence proves what the gospel said. And then I shall also have recourse to as it was in the title, the accounts of the pilgrims to see if the Gospels, the archaeological evidence, the pilgrims' account would match or be in contrast or whatever. But I decided not to go against the teaching of the Gospels before having compared them with what the archaeological evidence was. And then I said, well, worst case scenario, if the archaeology tells something different than the Gospel, at that point I'll start I should try to find alternative options. I don't know if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And so there were these 6 points. That the first one was the site of the Passion and Resurrection, was called Calvary, Golgotha. Actually, Calvary comes from the Latin name of the word skull, that in Latin is calva, for calva, comes Calvary, Calvario in Italian, Calvarius in Latin, and Calvary in English. Golgotha is Hebrew, of course. In Hebrew, skull is Golgolet. So Golgotha very clearly is a name that derives from. So then number 2, in the side, there was a garden with a new tomb. Number 3, the site was outside of the town, but close to the city walls. Number 4, the tomb had been hewn in the rock, and the entryway could be closed with the big stone, which could be rolled. In this case, it says the big stone, but also the gospel says big stone. They do not specify what was the shape of the stones. But as I mentioned later, there was Winibald, who was a pilgrim who visited Jerusalem, if I remember correctly, in 754, who wrote that the tomb that blocked the stone, I said the opposite. The tomb that blocked the stone that blocked the tomb was cubic, was square. So then number 5, the tomb had an arcosolium with a stone bench on the right after entering. Arcosolium, we shall see later, it was a niche on carved or hewn in the wall. And 6, the owner of the tomb was Joseph of Arimathea. So having said this, the first thing that one that I found probably the most fascinating was the fact that Father Corbo and his team found these structures, and I know I already mentioned to you, so I'm not asking what do you think it is. You know it, but this is a remain of what of a quarry of stones. So the team of Father Corbo found that in the area where later the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre would be built, there was a quarry of stones that was in use from the 7th century BC until the 1st century BC. And here you see there were blocks of stone had already been cut to be extracted, but for some reason were not. Anyway, in the Calvary was on the eastern edge of the quarry. The tomb had been hewn or was still under process of being excavated, was not completed, and was being hewn in the western edge of the quarry.
So, if I can interrupt you there,
Yes, no
you have Golgotha or Calvary on the east side, and you have the tomb potentially on the west side, and then that was above, I guess, each side of the quarry. How could Joseph of Arimathea then have owned the tomb, so to speak, when it was in a quarry? Did he own the whole quarry, or did he just own, the side of the quarry? Any thoughts on how he owned that quarry, or that
Yeah.
tomb rather?
If you let me show the next 2 slides, the third one, I'll explain.
I'm way ahead of you.
About Joseph of Arimathea.
Thank
So
you.
no problem. So here is another example of the remains of the quarry. You see, not the structure here on the right hand side. This is of course a modern railing. That is a modern wall, as you can see. But you see there are some steps. You see there looks like steps.
Hmm.
You see those steps there?
Yes.
It's more visible in the next slide. You see here, same thing. You see those steps?
Yes.
Those were what was left of the extraction of stone. So each step corresponding to a block of stone had been removed. Then remove another one at the lower level, then at the lower level. So this is what was left. Was in use from the 7th century BC until the 1st century BC. But then the activity of extraction was interrupted, and they filled the floor of the quarry with dirt, and especially in light of the fact that all those steps formed like terraces, and they turned the floor of the quarry into a garden. This is why in chapter 19 of the Gospel of John, verses 41, it says, "This in the place where Christ had been buried, there was a garden, and in the garden there was a tomb. This is another thing that always floor me. Why the heck there was a tomb in a garden?
Mhm.
The point is that in Italian, when we say giardino, che corresponds to garden in English, we think of flowers. Here in English, we use garden to also to use to indicate a place where people grow produce, tomatoes, peppers, that kind of stuff. Actually, what we call garden, it was more an orchard because Father Corbo found remains of find evidence they cultivated, they grew olive trees, fig trees, and vine and grapes practically. So, um, sorry, the question was how very likely Joseph Arimathea purchased. I'm not able to. Archaeology was not able as Jody Magnus, that archaeology from North Carolina. The archaeologist doesn't tell us if he possessed the whole quarry or just a part of it, but definitely at least a part. And this explains also why when Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and found it empty, at the point she was weeping, and Christ appeared to her and said, "Why are you weeping?" And she thought that he was the gardener. So I said, "What?" There was a gardener again, because that evidently belonged to Joseph Arimathea, not just the tomb that was under excavation, but also very likely also the garden and around it. Um, oh, the quarry was quite big. So the yellow perimeter that I'm now running around with my cursor, that was the perimeter of the quarry. The white perimeter is the perimeter of the Basilica of Holy Sepulchre. So you can see the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre covers only one section of the quarry. The quarry had a length of about, at its longest extension of almost 600 feet, and a width at its largest extension of 300, about 300, between 300 and 400 feet. So it was quite big. And here, as you can see, that there are two. Here on the left hand side, you see where I have the cursor along the perimeter. That is where the tomb of Christ was being excavated. So along the western edge of the quarry, and here I circle with white. That was the rock of Calvary. Although the rock of Calvary, especially after the works of Constantine, was reduced a lot, for sure was part of connected to the to the was connected to the quarry. So here it seems
Mhm.
separated. Okay. So at that point I said, well, let's try to see what were the different kind of tombs that were the most common at the time of in the first century AD, at the time of Christ. So we can start to rule out which tombs could not match the description of the Gospels and the findings of archaeology. The first century tombs in Palestine, and especially around Jerusalem, were three kinds of tombs: the shaft tombs, loculus. Loculus is a Latin word. The plural is loculi. In Hebrew would be koch singular, kohim plural. An arcosolium tomb. So let's start with the shaft tomb. A shaft tomb was the kind of tomb that we find in the cemeteries nowadays. They would dig a shaft, like a pit, and then put the body at the bottom of the shaft, wrapped in a shroud, and then or in the shroud, or even placed in a coffin, but wrapped in a shroud, and then they would cover the body with the slab and fill the rest of the shaft with fill the rest of the shaft here with dirt. But shaft tombs in the first century Palestine, Jerusalem, Palestine were only 5% of the tombs, so very very few. Then there were the loculus or loculi, which is plural, which is in Hebrew would be plural would be koch, singular kochim. The loculi were horizontal shafts that were hewn or excavated from the walls of the burial chamber. Have you been to Rome?
I have not yet, but
Okay.
it's coming
But
soon. But
have you ever seen pictures of the Roman catacombs, the Christian catacombs in?
yes, yes,
Okay. If you notice in the Christian catacombs, the loculi were parallel to the corridor or to the wall of that delimited the surrounded the corridor.
right.
In this case, the shafts were hewn or excavated perpendicular to the walls. So, and they were quite deep. They could go from 6 feet to 6 feet 8. So, and the body would be placed inside the shaft head first, and then very very often they would be covered with a stone. Each loculus or each cock would be closed with a stone. And finally, there were the tombs with arcosolium, singular, or arcosolia, plural. There were these niches that were hewn in the wall. I'll show an example of all three of these kind of tombs. So this is an example of a shaft tomb. You see there is a child that is has been lowered down into the bottom of the pit or the shaft, and then there was sometimes there was another cavity that was hewn. The body would be placed inside the cavity, close with the rock, and then the pit would be or shaft would be filled with dirt. Well, let me say first the other. This is an example of a tomb with kohim or loculi. There are 3 kohim here, or 3 loculi, that were hewn inside the burial chamber of the inside the wall of the burial chamber, perpendicular to the wall of the burial. And then you see on the left-hand side there is one stone that would close the loculus or the cock or still up. The one on the left, the stone is still there, but has fallen to the ground. The one in the middle, the stone is not there.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an example of an arcosolium tomb. So it's a niche arcosolium, because you see the ceiling of the niche was kind of curved, like an arch, a mild arch, not a very curved one, and the body would be placed on the stone bench at the bottom of the niche. Well, in the Gospel of John 20:12, Mary Magdalene is there weeping. And then she also stoops down and she sees 2 angels, one sitting where the feet of Christ had been placed, and one sitting where the head of Christ had been placed. So definitely 2 angels would not fit inside the shaft tomb. And in case of a tomb with the loculus, maybe there could be an angel at the end where the correspondence where the feet of Christ would be, but definitely not. You could not put an angel inside the tomb where the head of Christ. So
Right.
those definitely don't match the description of. So the only option that would be a tomb with the. And actually, the archaeology, there are further evidence that confirms that. So this is a drawing that I'm sorry, this is a model, probably a diorama that I took from the website of of National Geographic. As you can see that you see the bottom of the quarry, the floor of the quarry that was no more in use. Here on the left hand side, you see the tomb that was still being hewn in the rock, and this is the promontory, the outcrop of rock that was the Calvary where Christ was crucified. But here we don't see that it's not evident that the floor of the quarry had been transformed into a garden. We shall see in the next slides. Oh, this is a plan of Jerusalem at the time, more or less at the time of Christ, so around 33 AD. You see there that is the quarry. So the Calvary was on the eastern edge, the tomb was on the western edge. But as you can see, the tomb was outside of the city walls. Was not within Jerusalem. You see here there is you see it's written, it is called here there was a gate in the city walls. It was called the Gernat Gate. Gernat Gate means the gate of the garden. So very likely the gate took the gate took the name from the garden that had been developed at the bottom of inside the quarry, and so and then there is this is fascinating. There is a passage from, this is not from the Gospel, but from the letter of St. Paul to the Hebrews, chapter 13, verses 12, where St. Paul says, "So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood." And actually the quarry was outside. The Christ was crucified outside the gate. And then there is an account from Josephus, the Jewish historian. He wrote, "The second wall took its beginning from that gate which they called Genath, which belonged to the first wall. It only encompassed the northern quarter city and reached as far as the Tower Antonia." This is Josephus from the Jewish Wars. So practically, so these, sorry, this was the Gennat Gate. This one here was the first wall that Josephus describes. This was the second wall that Josephus described. It started from the Gennat Gate, went north, and then there was a bend and turned towards the east, and then where there was the Antonian fortress. Does it make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Questions? Do you have any questions? No.
No, but it was just very interesting to see how the different locations were in terms of where the city wall was, and then where the gates were, and then where now the tomb is, and how close everything was.
Yes. So, but then in the Gospel of John 19:20, it also says that many of the Jews read the title, you mean the Titulus Crucis, it was the one we talked for a little bit in three languages, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Read this title: "For the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city," and we have seen that, yes, was just a sound. So this is Naman Abigad. Naman Abigad was a Jewish archaeologist who, in 1970s, excavated an area close to a little bit south of where there is nowadays the Basilica of Holy Sepulchre. So where at the time there would have been the Gennat Gate, and at a certain point he found these structures. So you see what looks like a door there that is made of a concrete that is modern, but you see on the left hand side and on the right hand side there are some remains of walls made of stones. the ones between the two red arrows. So that was an
Yes.
opening. That was an opening at the in the city walls of the time of Christ. So he now Avigad the positive the estimating maybe assume that that was what remained of the Ganath gate at the time, and he was right.
So, Massimo, this has really been fascinating, and I know you have a lot more that we're going to do in a second session. Let's close it off here, and then tell us what we're going to see in the next session, and then we'll close it out for this session.
Well, in the second session, I shall show that there are some computer reconstruction made by a Greek architect called Haris Karlakidis, who has made the computer reconstruction of the area of the quarry, the tomb, the car. They are really fantastic. And then we shall see how in the year 17, then there was Titus who besieged and conquered Jerusalem and razed the temple to the ground. Then in 135, the Emperor Hadrian, after defeating the rebellion of Bar Kokhba, he rebuilt the whole city of Jerusalem and he called it Aelia Capitolina. And he buried the whole area of the quarry and the tomb. He wanted to delete completely the memory of Christianity or Christ from the mind of the inhabitant Jerusalem. And then at the beginning of the fourth century, around 330, the Emperor Constantine then razed to the ground the temple built by Hadrian and built the complex that then later became the Basilica of Holy Sepulchre.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, fascinating. Well, I'm definitely excited to see that and it's interesting to see how the destruction took place in 70 and then 145 and then I guess Constantine kind of uh,
135, 135.
135 with Bar Kokhba and then later with Constantine as he tried to renovate or rescue or uncover some of those areas. It's also interesting that in the as I understand it in 135, then the tomb was destroyed or was tried to be destroyed, and also Golgotha, but nevertheless those more or less survived in certain pieces, and then that's what we see in the Holy Sepulchre Church.
No, to clarify, Hadrian only buried the two structures, so they covered with dirt. So he didn't destroy anything.
Oh,
But
okay.
but in 1009, the Caliph, the Fatimid Caliph of Egypt, Al-Hakim, he ordered the whole Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre to be razed to the ground
Hmm.
completely. And that was thank God that since at the time they didn't have bulldozers and the tracker would take away the debris or the destruction. The more they demolished, the more they accumulated debris at the ground level. But even the edicule, they destroyed the roof. They didn't raise to the edicule to the literally to the foundations, but then they definitely destroyed the roof, and so that was the most devastating destruction that the whole complex underwent. So in its
Mhm.
history, almost 1700 years of history. So.
Yeah, wow, fascinating. Well, I'm definitely very excited to hear that. Let's break here. And so, Massimo, thank you so much. And then we will pick this up here in the next session. And for the audience, please stay tuned for this second session and many other videos in this series on the backstory of the Shroud of Turin. Massimo, thank you very much.
Thank you to you. Have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.